Perhaps we all need a little bromance in our lives. A relationship like Turk and JD from Scrubs, or like Michael and Chandler from Friends. But maybe not to that extent, okay? We've all had a best friend that we could turn to in times, or someone just generally that we can hang out with and laugh with and all that good stuff. MMA has seen many successful bromances, but it has also seen these bromances crumble before our very eyes. My name is Rob from UpNext MMA, and in this video, we'll be diving into 5 of the most infamous bromances that unfortunately now cease to exist for several reasons. Anyway, let's get into it. This will be part 1 of a 2-part series. Number 1. Jon Jones and Rashad Evans. Now, a lot of newer MMA fans may not remember this, but Jon Jones and Rashad Evans used to be training partners. Jon started training in New York, where he was from, but he was seen as an athletic phenom. So he amazed people with his athletic ability when he really was training at a no-name gym. So a lot of people jumped at the chance to train him. This is 2008, 2009. Anyway, in 2009, I think he transitioned over to Greg Jackson's. Guess who was champion then? The light heavyweight champion. Rashad Evans, who had been at Greg Jackson's for years at that point. He had beaten Forrest Griffin at UFC 92 in December of 2008 to win the title. And he was seen as, one of the poster boys for the UFC at the time. In 2009, a lot of people were very high on Jon Jones, but he had work to do in terms of building himself up as a contender. Now, Rashad would go on to lose the title at UFC 98 in May of 2009. Now, he would battle his way back. He beat Thiago Silva as well as Quentin Rampage Jackson in his subsequent fights, and he would eventually earn another title shot. But in that time, guess who had been coming up and beating a lot of guys? Jon Jones. Jon Jones had ran through the light heavyweight division. So when the next opportunity to fight for the light heavyweight title came up, and the light heavyweight champion at the time was Shogun, who had since beaten Lyoto Machida, Evans was supposed to fight Shogun at UFC 128. But Rashad had to withdraw due to injury, and the opportunity to face Shogun was offered to Jon Jones, who had just choked out Ryan Bader. And Evans was adamant that he would never fight Jones if he won the title. They wanted to keep a big brother vibe and that they would figure something out. Lo and behold, Jon Jones absolutely destroys Shogun. I talked about this before in my other videos. He beat the brakes off Shogun. He wins the title, and they go about this, big brother, little brother vibe for a few more months until things eventually start to stall out. Rashad has a falling out with Greg Jackson because Greg Jackson, he wants to train with the guy who's actually the champion, who's going to be making a ton of money from the UFC versus Rashad. And it kind of broke down from there. Rashad left Greg Jackson's. He went to go train at Black Zillions, or what was back then Black Zillions. I think it's now called Sanford MMA in Southern Florida. And, Greg took sides. He took Jon's side. And Rashad, built a little beef with Greg Jackson that extended onto Jon Jones. And that pretty much symbolized their relationship for the foreseeable future and built up a lot of tension up until, you guessed it, their eventual fight. Now, they eventually did lock horns later on. I think it was in April of 2012. I forget which UFC it was, but John Jones did beat Rashad by unanimous decision, pretty dominantly. But I'll never forget the tension up until that fight where they were trading insults with each other in interviews and on Twitter, going back and forth. It was very entertaining, but it was also sad to see because I remembered when they were genuinely friends, and they're great friends now, or at least they're civil around each other now. I mean, it's almost 8 years later, but man, back then though, they had some serious tension, and you know, that's one of the things when you throw money and a UFC championship in the mix between two people, they're usually going to end up fighting each other, and we've seen this many times. But that's the first one, and I think is one of the most distinguishable ones from, recent MMA memory. Anyway, on to the next one. Number 2, Tito Ortiz and Dana White. Now, this is also one of the most infamous ones. I mean, Dana White still talks very badly about Tito Ortiz, even till this day. But believe it or not, these two were once very, very good friends. You have to go all the way back to the pre-Zuffa days. But, their feud is cemented as one of the greatest in MMA history. Now, before Dana White became the vice president of the UFC, he was actually a manager for MMA fighters. I think he started out in boxing, but he didn't really make it there, so he did it in MMA instead. And he was the manager of Tito Ortiz. I think he was also Chuck Liddell's manager too. But Dana was the man that, got the higher ups like Tito Ortiz bigger paychecks for his fight. And, because this is, guys, we're talking like late 90s, early 2000s. And Dana was known for being that manager who got fighters bigger paydays. But in 2001, Dana became the president of the UFC, and he had to terminate his role as manager of Tito Ortiz. Now, you can imagine the nature of Tito and Dana's relationship has now changed, because instead of Dana and Tito being on the same side of negotiations for compensation for fights, they're now on the opposite side. So things degraded very quickly. It was believed that Tito used his status and power as a public figure to try and get more money out of the UFC for his fights, and Dana just refused to comply. He just refused to comply. He's like, I'm not willing to pay you that, dude. And this is early 2000s. Remember, the UFC was very, very, very high in debt back then, and just due to that nature, the legendary feud was born. The heated rivalry became a public affair, and the animosity between the two seemed to just get worse over time. The two exchanged several derogatory taunts and vibes in public. Neither party refused to back down. In a notable incident, Tito Ortiz wore a shirt to a weigh-in that rhymes with Dana White is my witch. Now, obviously you know what I'm saying, and I think Tito did that in his upcoming fight with Lyoto Machida. I think that was at UFC 84 in 2008, and I think that at the time that was Tito's last fight on his contract, I think. But Dana White had some harsh words for Tito Ortiz, that he's one of the most dishonest human beings that he had ever met, that, quote, if I had put up with him when he was a good fighter, I'd put up with him when he was a good fighter. He's not anymore. He's done. I'm no longer in the Tito Ortiz business. Now, it didn't stop there. I mean, they went back and forth for a while over money and a whole bunch of that stuff. it's all in the history books now, but this shows that Dana White has had a history of getting into it with fighters. Tito Ortiz was the first one. Tito Ortiz was the first public feud that he ever had with a fighter. But in my opinion, it's one of the most infamous ones because Tito was the star of the company back then, and Tito didn't back down. But like everybody who goes to feud with Dana, they all eventually lose. Because the UFC can just control the narrative and Dana can control the narrative. And once the UFC blew up and they had more stars like Chuck Liddell, like Randy Couture, George St. Pierre, Matt Hughes, they didn't need Tito anymore. Just the company had more leverage, and that only has continued to grow over time with the UFC having leverage over these fighters. Dana just never backed down. He stopped caring about Tito. And Tito eventually had to move on as well. But they still talk badly about each other till this day, unfortunately. I think it's more civil, but it is what it is. Anyway, on to our next one. Okay guys, that's gonna do it for this one. I know we only talked about 2 in this video, but you know me, I like to get deep into the weeds with a lot of this stuff, especially from a historical context, because I know a lot of you MMA fans are new, hence why I started out with like the older ones first, with Dana and Tito and John Jones and Rashad Evans, because a lot of you guys don't remember those feuds. I've been a fan of MMA for a long time, so a lot of it's still fresh in my mind. But we're going to cap this video off here. Tell me what you guys think. Especially a lot of you OG MMA fans. Do you guys think that, Tito and Dana, that their relationship can ever be patched up? It's hard to believe that they were ever even friends, honestly. But do you guys think that they could ever patch that up? I know they're friendlier now, but what do you think? Also, do you think that John Jones going to heavyweight is a good idea? Do you think he'll maintain that explosiveness that he did at light heavyweight? Let me know what you think, as well as what did you think of the whole Rashad and John Jones feud when it was happening? Because I remember when they were training partners, and I was like, yeah, it's only a matter of time till this blows up. But what do you guys think? Anyway, remember to like and subscribe to this video. It helps the algorithm and making sure that more people see it and can learn about MMA and our sport as a whole. Also, hit the notification bell to make sure that you're notified and are updated every time we come up with a new video. We try to get 3 videos out to you guys a week. And yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I appreciate you. Have a great day.